I've been riding along today, I thought of a new interesting series of videos that I'm going to start, and this is going to be the first one. So we're going to call it Ride and Ramble with Dual Sport Doug. So we're just going to ride along and talk about stuff and things motorcycle related. Holy smokes, I can't see. So, Season 1, Episode 1, in this rugged, nasty terrain. I've kind of got my head tilted below so that I can get the sun out of my eyes behind my visor on my helmet. Season 1, Episode 1. So let's go back to the beginning. How did I get interested in motorcycles? There's actually a video I have that's kind of a crude video done in my little makeshift office where I pulled up some slides of my first DR350, literally a slideshow in a video. And my first experience with a motorcycle was, I think, let me think about this for a second, it was summer of 1981. Went to, I kind of talked about that in this video, talked about this in that video, but my cousins lived near Lolo, Montana, and we would go to visit them every once in a while, and for whatever reason my brother spent several weeks there, and then me and my mom and dad went to visit and picked him up, but we spent a long weekend there, like a holiday weekend or something, I don't know. And my cousins had a motorcycle, a little Yamaha MX-80, and I threw a picture of that, not of that their exact motorcycle, but of one that I could find. And my brother had already ridden it quite a bit and kind of got hooked on the idea of getting a motorcycle, and then I rode it a few times too. Fast forward later that year or the next year, my dad found a Honda Trail 70 and then bought it for my brother, and then somebody that he used to know, my dad used to know through, or still did, through circles of musician friends. My dad was part of a band, and he knew a whole lot of other musicians. Well, one of the other musicians lived just a couple houses down or something from one of the guys that was in my dad's band, and that gentleman had two Trail 90s and a Trail 70. So my dad, I didn't know this until about 2 years ago, that the first Trail 90 that my dad bought, he bought it from that other musician friend, and then later on bought the other Trail 90 and the Trail 70. And the Trail 70 was the one that was for me, and it was pretty well clapped out. The exhaust, the head pipe was rusted out right where it came up to the muffler. The rear tire was completely bald, and I ended up kind of fixing it up, and I had a paper route prior to getting that Trail 70, so I had funds available to spend on fixing the bike up. And that paper route, the mechanical experience needed to keep the bicycle running, plus doing all the work on that motorcycle, that Trail 70, that was kind of where I got started in my mechanical aptitude, working with tools and fixing stuff and whatnot. And I ended up having that Trail 70 for a couple years and sold it during that time that my brother and I had our Trail 70s and the Trail 90s that my dad and mom had, we ended up buying multiple Trail 90s, fixing them up and reselling them. I remember a yellow one that leaked oil like a sieve. I remember an orange one that hardly had any miles on it. I don't remember for sure how many we ended up buying, but it probably numbered at least 3, in addition to the one that my mom and dad had. Well, then there was a stretch of time where none of us had motorcycles, and we went our separate ways, my brother and I did, and then joined the Air Force. And I always had this desire to have another motorcycle. And in probably those years of when I had the Trail 70, I had my eye on wanting at the time it was called an enduro motorcycle. It was essentially a dual purpose bike that Honda had. It was their XL series 250. That's what I wanted back in the mid 80s. Well, fast forward to my time in the Air Force, I ended up buying a blown up, I think it was a 1986 XL 250R or XR 250L. I think it was probably an XL 250R. Honda switched up their naming nomenclature in the mid to late 80s, I think. Maybe early 90s, I don't remember. Originally they were called the XR2 or XL250R, and then later they changed it to the XR250L and XR650L. So a friend of the Air Force that I worked with, he got orders to go overseas, and the bike he had, for the time that he had it prior to me getting to that Air Force base, it was his primary means of transportation during the spring, summer, and fall. And then he would put it up for storage at a friend's house in the wintertime because it would get cold and totally not conducive to riding up in eastern Washington. Well, on his way to the friend's house to put it in storage for the winter, it blew up. And I don't know for sure when that was. It could have been 1987, the winter of 1987. But no, actually it wouldn't have been, because I got to that base in 1988. So I don't know, maybe it was the winter of 1987 that it blew up. Maybe he rode it 2 summers and it blew up that second time he was taking it to the friend's house. Anyway, it was sometime during the summer of 88 that I ended up buying it. I remember that much about it because I towed it around some, trying to sell it in a U-Haul trailer that I towed behind my full-size Chevy Blazer. Actually, you know, that it wasn't until 89, summer of 89, that I bought it. I still had the full-size Blazer at the time, and then I ended up trading off that full-size Blazer for an S10 Blazer. And I remember it seemed like it was the day that I picked up the Blazer and was heading back to the base with it after I bought it. I stopped at the Honda motorcycle shop. I had pulled the motor out of the bike in the parking lot at the barracks that I lived in, taken it to the dealer, probably in my full-size Blazer, and on my way home I literally put it in a milk crate, and I asked them to give me an estimate on what it would cost to rebuild it. It ended up being far more money than I could afford to get it rebuilt, so it literally became a basket case. So I picked up the milk crate full of all of the parts, hence the term basket case. It literally was a basket case. And that I took a corner too fast coming home, and that dang milk crate tipped over and puked oil in the back of my just acquired 2-year-old S10 Blazer. So that was pretty heartbreaking. I was able to get the oil cleaned up. Well, I ended up having that bike for probably another year. It was just totally out of my financial means to get it rebuilt, so I ended up selling it. I think I paid $75 for it and sold it for $500. The guy that bought it, he was totally fine that it was a basket case. That was the only issue, was the engine needed to be rebuilt. So I still had this desire to want some sort of a enduro style motorcycle that was street legal but off-road capable. Well then, in 1994, my brother moved back up to Washington from Florida after he finished up his 4 years in the Air Force. And then he started to want an off-road bike too. So the two of us started shopping, and the bikes that we looked at were the Suzuki DR 250 and 350, the Kawasaki KLR 250, and briefly looked at the Honda XR 250L. The 250L was kickstart in 1994. The thing that was unique about the DR 250 and 350 from Suzuki is they were electric start. That was the first year of the electric start. And Suzuki had coined, I'm pretty sure that Suzuki invented the term dual sport back when they came out with the DR 250 in 1990. So it was 1994 was the first year of the electric start. So it basically became a no-brainer to get a bike that was electric start, and it became even a no-brainer to buy the 250 instead of buy the 350 instead of the 250. It just made no sense to buy the 250. I think the 350 was only about $200 to $300 more. So one Saturday, the weekend before Memorial Day weekend, my brother bought one, and he wrote it down to where I was doing a work-related sales gig at a local RV store, just helping out with one of the sales reps for the company I worked for. So I left that little gig early, went to the same dealer, ended up buying the other DR 350 that they had in stock. So we ended up buying a matching pair of 1994 DR 350s, and they even had ended up having consecutive license plates. I rode that bike up until I think 2000 and put about 16,000 miles on it. And I used to ride upwards of 3,000 miles a year. I'd ride enough every year where I would blow through a rear tire every season. And Suzuki had a series of was called the Suzuki AMA National Dual Sport Series. And I remember Suzuki had a poster that was made in conjunction with the AMA, and all the Suzuki dealers had this poster, and it advertised all the different dual sport rides that were part of the Suzuki AMA National Dual Sport Series, and there was a bunch of them all over the country, and there was a handful of them in Washington and Oregon, and we could literally do a dual sport ride just about every month. Between hitting up several in Washington and one in Oregon. One time, we even went down to Northern California near Crescent City to do a 2-day dual sport event. That was a crazy drive. I tried to take the day off work, and I could have easily taken a day off, but they wouldn't let me. I may have been able to get a couple of hours off work and beelined out of town to California, and I drove all night from Kent, Washington area down to Northern California and Crescent City. I don't think I got to camp until like 1 or 2 in the morning. It was crazy, ridiculous hour. Ended up mostly being an okay ride. The scenery was beautiful. Riding through the redwoods. It was called the Coast Redwoods Dual Sport Ride. One of the days it rained on us, and I don't remember if it was Saturday or Sunday. It may have been Sunday, the second day of the ride. It was absolutely miserable. My brother and I got to a big, nasty uphill that was like a skating rink of dirt road, and I decided I'm not riding up that. I think that was our third or fourth year of riding. Anyway, we waited till the sweep riders caught up to us, and both of us said, we're not riding that. So the sweep riders took us back to camp on other dirt roads and whatnot, and by the time we got back to camp, we were just absolutely, completely soaked. Cold, drenched. Well, I mean, we were pretty much soaked before that, but it was one of the most miserable rides I've ever had. So anyway, I had that first DR350 up through 2000, the year that the DRZ 400 came out, and I contemplated buying a DRZ, but the thing about it that made me shy away from it was how tall they were. So I didn't buy one. I ended up selling that DR350 after I bought a 1997 pre-owned DR350. So I rode that second DR350 up through 2005 riding season, and then decided it was time for a DRZ 400. And what made me really decide on that was I was camped over here in the same area, and a friend of a friend, well, let's see, it was a friend of mine introduced 2 of his friends and co-workers to riding. And I had a dual sport related website back then, and both of those guys had seen my website, and maybe that's what got them interested in riding. I don't know for sure. Anyway, so 2 of those guys, the friend plus one of his co-workers, came over here. We camped out at Lake Wenatchee State Park, went up the White River Road, which goes on the other side of it, follows the lake up, crosses the river at the end of the lake, and then winds its way up into the hills. Well, when we got back down to the pavement, the guy on the DRZ said, hey, do you want to switch bikes? And I said, sure. So that was my first experience riding the DRZ 400. And immediately I fell in love with it because I had a much more upright and less cramped seating position. And what I mean by that was my legs weren't bent at the knees quite as much as they were on the DR350, and it just felt so much more ergonomically friendly, and I loved that. So at the after I was finished riding that year, I decided it was time to start DRZ shopping. Didn't really get serious about it until the following year. There was a discussion group that I was the admin for. It was called the Washington Dualsport Riders. We abbreviated the WADSR, and it was a spin-off from the same thing that a guy that I knew started up down in Oregon. Wow, I wish I could remember that guy's name. Dave was his name. I think he lived in the Salem area. And they were hosted on Yahoo. They were called Yahoo discussion groups. And they were either email based, where you could fire off a message to the group email address, and then the group system, the back end, would fire off a message via email to everybody that was a member, or you could browse the discussion online. It was kind of a rudimentary style forum. It's kind of the predecessor to internet forums like Thumper Talk and whatnot. Anyway, so a gentleman ended up posting his DRZ 400 for sale for $4,000. It was 4 years old. It was a 2002 model, so let's put this in perspective. It was in 2006, February of 2006. So a friend and I went and looked at it. Andy, I've mentioned him in a lot of videos, and you've seen him in some of my riding videos. Maybe not yet, but I've got tons of videos that I haven't edited yet where he's in them. But so we went and looked at it. It was about 20 miles away from where I lived. I remember taking it for a test drive in the dark, and I ended up buying it. And then I promptly wheeled it into my living room, set it on a piece of cardboard actually it was in the dining room. I could wheel it in through my back patio door right into the dining room and commenced to outfitting it the way I wanted it, doing all the different upgrades and getting rid of the big bulbous rear fender and tail light and all that, and the turn signals, and put a nice slim fender eliminator kit. Anyway, so here it is. 19 years later, and I'm still riding the same bike. I have had 2 other bikes during the time that I've had this bike. Actually, I've had 2 other dual sport bikes during the time that I've had this. Plus, I've had a KLR 650 for a few years. Plus a Tenere 700 that I decided was too big and top heavy for my level of skill. Plus, I ended up needing the money for something else, so I sold it. And it was kind of 3 different things factored into why I got rid of it. But my other dual sport bikes that I've had during the time that I've had this have been a 2012 KTM 500 EXCF, which was a vibrating monstrosity. I only rode that 1 season and then sold it. And then in 2019, I bought another KTM, a 450 EXCF, which I still have. I don't ride that bike much. It primarily sees action on single track trail. It's dual sport, legal, street legal, whatever. But occasionally I will get it out and ride it on stuff like this. And the first year I didn't even ride it except around home to get break-in miles on it. I bought it in August of 2019. I hemmed and hawed and debated for about 5 months, and finally I decided just to buy it. A friend, Andy, he had bought the Husky version of that bike the previous year in 2018, if I recall correctly. It's an FE 450, and he gave me a lot of education on the KTMs and Huskies of the 500, 450, and 350 class. And what he had heard based on discussions he had been involved in and all the reading he had done was that the 500 vibrated the most, the 450 was less, and then the 350 was less than that. And I just remember the 500 that I had, its vibration was pretty obnoxious through the handlebars. And at the time I had what I thought was carpal tunnel, so any kind of vibration through my hands just really aggravated the numbness and tingling I was already experiencing periodically in my hands. It turned out it wasn't carpal tunnel, it was just really bad tendonitis, primarily in my right arm, that mimicked symptoms of carpal tunnel. So I ended up with the 450. I love that bike. So here we are back at deer camp. I think that's probably about the end of season 1, episode 1, or at least the end of episode 1 of Ramble and Ride with Dual Sport Doug. So we'll just finish off a mile or so of scenery. It definitely warmed up quite a bit. Just before I turned the camera back on, I stopped up above and turned around at that point and threw on my windbreaker jacket. And I couldn't go quite as fast because the sun was in my eyes. Anyway, it's warm down here at the 2,000 foot elevation. So, if you've got any questions about all of that rambling I just did, drop a comment down below. Check out my Amazon affiliate links. Any goodies that you buy through those links don't cost any extra. It just gives me a little sales commission. Helps me buy more junk for my RV and my camera gear setup and whatnot. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for episode 2 coming soon of Ride and Ramble with Dual Sport Doug.